Hi, Dave Allen again. We're looking at the Championship League this time, all 24 teams in the context of predictions for 23-24. And again, you might have made your predictions and you're thinking of posting a video on YouTube justifying your choices. But before you do that, you check against last year's standings and you realise that your 4 of the clubs are exactly in the same place. And that all the clubs from the EPL, the 3 that have been relegated, you've put them all in the top 6 places. And all the clubs that have been promoted from the EFL, League One, you've relegated. So again, the question is, has this happened before? Are these savvy predictions, or are they perhaps a little bit daft? Format here is the same as the last video. We'll look at the 27 years of place changes in the Championship League. And then we'll look at some predictions in comparison to that data. And then I'm going to set out a way that we can do a precise calculation of prediction scores to identify clear winners and runners-ups and people like that. And then I'm going to invite you to send your own predictions on the Championship Leagues to me via email. Because as I said earlier on, this might be a bit ambitious, but with a bit of luck, we'll be able to cope with that. Anyway, so let's make a start and get on with this. By the way, this will be a little bit longer, this video, simply because the Championship League is a bit more complex. Thank you very much. Okay, right, well, just like the EPL, there's an awful lot of you out there in YouTube land who are doing these predictions and offering your thoughts on the Championship League. And just to remind you, the purpose here of these videos is to offer some advice on making the predictions and encourage more of you to give it a go. So predicting the Championship League is very different to the EPL. Remember or recall from the other video, the EPL, you're making a prediction for changes of the 17 clubs that stayed up in the league. Those were the incumbents, which we call the incumbents. And in addition, you're making predictions for the 3 teams promoted to the EPL from the Championship League. Well, in the Championship League, it's a bit more complex. You've got, you're making predictions of any change in place for 18 incumbent clubs, those who placed between 3rd and 21st last season and did not get through the promotion playoffs. In addition, you're making predictions for the 3 clubs relegated from the EPL, at the top there, and then you're also making predictions for the clubs that were promoted from League One. And in this respect, in some ways, I like to think of the EPL. If the EPL is a donkey ride, then predicting the Championship League is like a roller coaster. And we're going to go and follow the same kind of format. We'll have a look at this place analysis stuff, and then we'll look at some predictions. I'll offer some advice on these predictions based on an understanding of the data. We'll look at that consistent way to compare predictions, and then we'll look at this YouTube competition. So we'll start, and again, this is the same as with the last video. We start by comparing 2 years. So here is the data from 2019-20 and 2022-21 rather. So we had Leeds were the top of the league and West Brom, and Fulham won the playoffs. So we have some empty cells there because that denotes the fact that those clubs in those positions got promoted to the EPL. And we have our incumbent clubs, and those were not relegated in the previous season. So these are all the incumbent clubs. And in the first year, these incumbent clubs are ranked in their place order, and the place they achieved in the following year is then recorded. So we had Brentford, who were in 3rd in 2019-20, and in 2020-21 they were still in 3rd. So the difference in their place there was actually no change, and that's the important part, because what we're doing here is the first year of each pair of years is the reference place. And we use that to calculate the change in place. So the difference could be, 5 for Cardiff. They were in 5th, they went to 8th, and so the difference is -3. And this novel format allows us to identify the number of clubs that do not change their place, the number of clubs that are involved in what we're calling a Black-Swan event for the statisticians. This is plus or minus 13 places, like the APL, which is 8, and it's to do with, and this is roughly twice the standard deviation of the differences for a whole 27-year period. We needn't bother ourselves too much about that. but we can also track the performance of the EFL promoted clubs and the clubs relegated from the EPL. So we got the last 3 years together. So there was that first set of years we had a look at. In the second brace of years from 2021, which is the reference year, to 21-22, well, that was a really wild year. We had 4 Black Swan events with 2 clubs, Preston North East and Stoke City, not changing their position, 14-14. Last year, from the difference between 21-22 to 22-23, we only had the 1 Black Swan event, and that was Huddersfield, but quite a significant event in itself. You know, from 3rd, they were in 3rd, they went to 18th, so quite a big drop. Now, the 2 YouTubers, there were 2 YouTubers, the Irish guy and James Lawrence Alcott, they actually correctly predicted Huddersfield dropping that much. So, you know, it's not impossible to predict these Black Swan events, and we'll look at to see why that's possible, why that is the case. The thing about this is this format lets us count stuff and do some percentage calculations. So, you know, that might worry some of you, but I'm doing it for you. So the good thing is we can then take a closer look at this and just to check we understand what's going on. So the club in 5th place went to 8th with a difference of -3. In the next year, the club in 5th position went to 24th, a difference of -19, and the club in 5th place in what would be 21-22 went to 2nd, so that's a difference of 3. And we can check all that out as we go down, and we can work it the other way around, where we can say 19 minus 7 is 12, 6 plus 6 is 12, and 5 plus 7 is 12, and likewise down there. And again, we can then count the number of times a club was promoted and stayed up, P plus, which I'm using there for promoted clubs, and then PR, which is promoted and relegated. So we can see here that the clubs of the EFL in 2021, 1 club stayed up, 2 were relegated. In 21-22, 2 clubs stayed up and 1 was relegated, and so forth. For the EPL demoted clubs, we can do the same, you know, who came in and stayed up and who came in and were relegated. So not only did they drop out of the EPL, they then dropped out of the Championship League down to League One. Okay, we can then split these tables, and we get 2 sets of tables, which is one is place changes. This is the place changes table here, and this is the difference table here. We can obviously do some totals up here along the bottom, teams in from the EPL, what positions they got, and the teams from the League One, how many of them were promoted and relegated, and then we can do a count here of these big changes in place, with either plus or minus 13, which we'll talk about in detail at some other point. So again, club in the 5th place in 2021 went to 8th. That's their difference of 3. In the following year, the club in 8th place went to 18th. That was a difference of minus 10. And then in the last year, the club that was in 15th place went to 10th, and so that was a difference of 5. We can then highlight these cells because this is useful. We saw that in the other video with the splatter plots. We can highlight the first and the second. We can then highlight the no changes in the grey cells there, and then we can also highlight the falls in place, the negative black swans, and highlight the positive black swans. And of course, again, we can then count all these Black Swan events up. So we see here that in 21-22 we had 4 such events, and 2 going up and 2 coming down, and that one going down by quite a significant amount. Okay, this is the data for the last 27 years, the place data for the last 27 years. And again, if we look at, just to remind ourselves what this table is showing you, it's showing you all the places that a club in 8th place, for instance, went to in the following season. So in 95-96, the club in 8th place went to 19th in 96-97. Here, say for instance, the club in 8th place in the year before 07 and 8, or was in 8th, they then went to 2nd place in 07-08. So an awful lot of data there, and it shows you how different places that a club can end up in from this particular reference place. We can then look at what happens to some of the teams in from the EPL. So in 13-14, a club was relegated from the EPL and ended up in 5th place. They didn't win the playoffs, so they remained in the league. And in the following year, they were out of the league, the Championship League, being relegated on place 23. And if you look at the total along here, there were 4 of them. These purple cells indicate that not many clubs from the EPL are then relegated almost immediately out of the Championship League. We can then look at maybe the promoted clubs from League One. So in 16-17, we had a club coming in at 14th place, which is not bad for a promoted team. But the year after, they bombed out on 22nd. This was Barnsley. And so, you know, they were out of the league. We can, like we did before for Everton on the other video, we can track a club. So here's a club that came into the the Championship League at 18th. And then in the following year, they went to 17th. Then these are its progress, and that was actually, in fact, Bristol City, who ended up last year on 14th. So that's the sort of data, and then we can use this now to count stuff. So we can talk about how many times a particular club got a reference place ended up in the first or second. So there were 4 occasions when a club in 3rd ended up in 1st and or 2nd. So 1, 2, 3, 4. And likewise, and the most common place there is actually 3 and or 6th. But again, we've got that total we've got here 33. So basically that's telling us that 33 of the incumbent clubs went to 1st or 2nd. We can look down here then for the clubs in from the EPL, and this might surprise some people, that in total 18 of these relegated clubs from the EPL, they got 1st or 2nd. And then we had 3 clubs from the League One who achieved that 1st or 2nd mostly, and the last time they did that was in 11 and 12. We can then obviously start doing the counting for the relegations. So of the incumbent clubs, 63 of the 81 relegations that would have occurred over this period, 3 times 27 is 81, were relegated, and we can start to get an idea about where the most common place for relegations occurs, and it's here obviously, not surprisingly, at position 21. 10 relegations over the last 27 years from any club in the 21st place. Again, we notice that not many clubs from the EPL have been relegated in the same year. They were Barnsley and Wigan. And again, we've got the relegations here. 16 of the promoted clubs from League One were relegated. Here we can then do some percentages. And we can see here that in terms of 1st and 2nds, 61% of the incumbent, 61% of 1st and 2nd places were taken by the incumbent clubs, and only 33% were taken by clubs from the EPL. And this probably might surprise people. I've seen a lot of predictions where it's just assumed immediately that the clubs that drop down from the EPL are just going to take the 1st and 2nd kind of like automatically. And it just doesn't work like that. I mean, if they've dropped out of the EPL, these teams have clearly had some problems, and it's clear that some of these problems just don't go away. And again, we've got very few from the League One making it to that. In terms of the relegation, what's interesting here again is, and this might sort of change some of your views, 78% of the relegations come from the incumbent clubs. 2% of relegations over the last 27 years have come from EPL clubs, those two there, and then only 20% of relegations occur or come from clubs that have been promoted from League One. So again, the assumption that maybe clubs promoted from League One will always be relegated is questioned by the data. So, and then we can do some percentages here, some more percentages, and in fact we can see that in terms of promoted and relegated, 65 were of the teams from League One stayed up, P+, and 16 were relegated. So that's a ratio of 80% staying up, 20% going down. So again, you know, it just confirms that the promoted clubs are actually doing quite well. Okie dokie, so let's do this as a splatter plot. I do like this splatter plots. And the idea here is we're trying to see if we can get any kind of patterns, discern any patterns. Well, the most obvious one at the moment that we can see is that the incumbent relegations come from clubs that were in 17th to 21st place in the previous season. So again, don't forget, this is about the previous season. So the club that was in 17th place in 95-96 went to were relegated in 96-97. So again, that's 55% of the relegations come from these positions. And now this is interesting because if we compare the splatter plot for the Championship League to that of the EPL, we can see that the EPL has got some more defined kind of patterns. You know, the champions come from the first three places, first, second and third, and the relegations are fairly, again, pretty predictable. They're going to come from 12th to 17th place. The EPL though, the Championship League, these are more scattered. They're all over the place, and it probably confirms what you've already suspected, that predicting the Championship is certainly more challenging than predicting the Premier League. So, you know, that's the roller coaster, the donkey ride. So, you know, well done you for giving it a go. Okay, so what's also noticeable here with the Championship League, and this caused me to think about how to present this data, is there's clearly some changes in patterns going on here. If you sort of squint, you can see that there's a sort of changes in patterns, and there's something a little bit different between these 9 years, which we'll have a look at in a minute. So what are we looking at? So let's look at the data. This is the place analysis, the changes in place of the incumbent clubs, and we've got sort of these 9-year periods. We've got the last 10-year periods if people feel that's relevant, and then we've got the whole period. And what we're doing is we're expressing these numbers here then as a percentage. So for instance, just to explain, shall we take the 10-year average, 63 clubs incumbents were relegated, and that represented 78% of the relegations. So here's some sort of highlights of this. Since 96-97, the proportion of incumbent clubs being relegated has actually fallen from 89 to 67. And if you have a quick peek at the promoted clubs from League One, you can see that they've increased. So that's where the change is occurring. For first and second places, the proportion of incumbent clubs taking these places has increased from 56 to over 67% over the period 2014 to 23. So again, it's interesting that this is happening, that the incumbents are gaining higher places, and probably largely at the expense certainly of the League One teams. In the last 9 years, there's been no relegations for clubs previously in 6th to 11th place. That's not readily apparent here, but that's the data that I picked up. And the playoffs actually are quite interesting, because it looks like clubs in 3rd place seem to win more playoffs, 10 times in the last 27 years. Let's have a look at the clubs from the EPL, from the EFL. These are promoted clubs, and as we mentioned earlier on, the relegations of the promoted clubs have increased from 11% up to 30% over this 27-year period. For these P+ clubs, the average place they've achieved in their year of promotion is actually 15th. 13th for the unrelegated clubs, and no club promoted to the Championship League has achieved first or second since 2011-12. Where some promoted clubs struggle is after their year of promotion, and over the last 9 years, 19 clubs to be promoted and stayed up, 6 were relegated in the following season, so that's about 33%. And then we'll look at the clubs from the EPL. So what we got here, only one club recently relegated from the EPL has been relegated down to League One. That was Wigan in 17-18. And then in the last 9 years, only 6 of the 27 clubs relegated from the EPL have achieved automatic promotion back to the EPL. So again, I need to sort of reinforce this. Any prediction placing 2 of the EPL teams in first and second could be seen as a little bit rash. Last year, 9 clubs. In the last 9 years, the EPL clubs have taken third to sixth 8 times, 22 times, 22% of the times. And in total, EPL clubs have appeared in the top 6 places 14 times, or 20% of the time. So over the last 10 years, if that's your criteria you want to use, the EPL clubs have appeared in the top 6 16 times. And again, that's only 27% of the time. So again, the EPL clubs aren't all invincible. They've been relegated into the Championship League for a reason, and those reasons have probably not gone away when they've gone into the Championship League. Okay, let's have a look at the no change in place. And again, what we're interested in here is zeros. So what we're saying here, the club in third place in 98-99, we stayed in that place in 2000, and we can then get some idea about what's happening. And this is probably what's really interesting here is only 23 times has a club in the last 27 years actually retained its place, has it stayed in place. So the Championship League is all about change, even for the incumbent clubs. And we're looking at basically only 4% of all potential changes in place out of 486. And again, you can see that this splatter plot shows that these are really relatively rare. And this suggests that at best, and here's the important bit, only one club in any one season will retain their league place, just as an average, such that any prediction of 3 or 4 clubs retaining their league place in a championship is again perhaps a little rash. And you can see here that we've got some interesting data, and I can't explain it. Clubs in 9th, 12th, 16th and 17th, they have always changed their place. They have never stayed in that position. So again, if you're looking at making predictions and you're pondering about the club's fortunes or possibilities, and they're currently in 9th, whatever you do, you might want to think about changing it. Of course, they could stay in 9th or 12th, whatever club you're looking at, because, you know, the laws of statistics and probability says that there can be these things. But so that, I can't explain that, but it's something to be observed. Let's have a look at these Black-Swan events. So don't forget, we're talking about big changes in place, which are probably unexpected, and we can count them. And here we've got the dark red cells are large falls in place. The green cells here are large rises in place. And we can see that there's been 39 of these events over the last 27 years in the EPL. And so this means that 8% of all changes in place have involved a change in a place greater than or equal to 13 places. Interestingly here, the number of Black Swan events involving a rise in place is 19, and is little different to those falling in place, involving a fall in place, 20, so it's roughly 50-50. Now, of the 27-year period, most positive Black Swan events saw the clubs getting into the top 6. And on 2 occasions, they actually got automatic promotion into the EPL. Those 2 there. But a lot of them, the negative, resulted in relegation. So that's 11 clubs here, big Black Swan events, and led to 11 relegations. And in the last 10 years there have been 17 Black Swan events, 7 down, 10 up, which averages out at about 1.7 per season. And you'll notice that what's interesting here is the proportion of teams having a Black Swan event shooting up the league table is slightly higher than those falling down, which is an interesting thing and probably needs to be looked at. So let's have a look at these Black Swan events, and here's the table of all the Black Swan events from 96-97, all 39 of them, and you'll notice that quite a lot of them involve relegations. What's even more significant is that the number of relegations involving a Black Swan event are much fewer in the last 10 years, from 14-15, which merits investigation. Now, big changes is a relative concept. If all clubs are changing their league place by 8 places, then plus or minus 8 would be seen as the norm and not as big. But we saw from the earlier data that we've got a range from plus 18 places, bouncing right up the table, to a big fall in place right down the table of minus 19. So in academic circles, Black Swan events are seen as both unexpected and they're statistically rare in terms of standard deviation and stuff like that. But in league football, these are unexpected, given the comments people make when they didn't see that one coming. But they're not rare on a season-to-season basis. After all, we've got 39 of these events, so they're kind of rare out of 486. But yet they've occurred in all but 5 seasons. And the other thing that's worth noting is that 23 clubs have been involved in these events, which represents 30% of all clubs that have appeared, 33% of all clubs that have appeared in the CL Championship League since 95-96. And some of these clubs have had more than one event. Derby, Millwall, not as far as Portsmouth, Reading. 3 events, and Huddersfield has had 4. And this, in actual fact, sees them often referred to as the yo-yo clubs. And what's probably also interesting is they often occur in pairs. It's a bit like what goes down has to go up, or what goes up has to come down. So Portsmouth went from 21 to 7th, and then bounced, went right up to 7th, and then fell back down again to 20th. We had the same happen with Derby. They went from 20th to 4th. That's a startling performance. They didn't last there long. In the following year, they went down from 4th back to 20th. So they tend to come in pairs, and I suspect it's easier to identify or probably predict the fall in place. What's perhaps less unsure is how they ended up getting into such a high place. And then we've got Reading there, and we've got Millwall, and then we've got Barnsley, where eventually they ended up being relegated. Then Huddersfield is the final one, I beg your pardon. So, because of these events, as we've defined it here, as plus or minus 8 has yet to be investigated. In the negative events, it's likely that they're triggered by an early losing streak that the players and the managers are not able to overcome. However, the extent that this could have been seen before the start of the season is hard to say. Likewise, I suppose, with positive events, an early winning streak, where an early winning streak is maintained. Here it's also important to point out that Black Swan events aren't unique to the Championship League. The EPL, if you looked at the other video, there's been over 46 of them. Here the criteria is plus or minus 8 places. What's interesting is, unlike the Championship, in the EPL, most Black Swan events are negative. Over 70% of them are a big fall in place. As it happened, I've had a quick look at the Bundesliga. I'm going to be looking at more of the European leagues over the summer. They've had 41 Black Swan events from 99-2000, a shorter period. But again, interestingly, for a sort of top flight league, the positive changes are outnumbered by the negative, 17 up, 24 down. So you're probably thinking, how do I go about predicting or thinking about a prediction here for a Black Swan event? Well, given the definition and the changes involved from the EPL plus or minus 8, for the Championship League here plus or minus 13, Black Swan events can only happen to incumbent clubs that were in a specific place last season, at the risk of patronising you. So what we've got here is we've got the Championship and the EPL 22-23 places, and it follows that this can only the Black-Swan events can only happen to certain teams. So there's, the negative events can only happen to these teams shown here in red. So, Middlesborough, Coventry, Sunderland, Blackburn, Millwall, West Brom, Swansea and Watford, they can't really go up because they were already in, if you like, 4th or 5th place in the 22-23 season. So if there's going to be a Black Swan event involving these clubs, it's going to be down. And conversely, we can look at positive ones. And here you're looking at the bottom of the league of the table, the bottom part of last year's league, Bristol City to Cardiff, and could these clubs go up? So could Bristol City claim the title and go from 14th to 1st, which is a difference of 13? Could Hull go from 15th to 2nd? Again, that's a difference of 13. So, and then with the EPL, you've got the 4 teams there that could go either way. So basically, these Black Swan events look like to be club-specific events. They're not necessarily systemic to the league. It's nothing to do with the regulations on promotion or relegation. So if you think of clubs down at the bottom of the table, your Bristol Cities, your Hulls, your Stoke City, Birmingham, Huddersfield, Rotherham, QPR, Cardiff, if they look like they're in really good shape with the right manager, good players, working well as a team, they've got supportive owners, then you might want to consider a big change in place to the top of the table. Those at the top of the table last season, your Middlesbrough down to Watford, if you think they're not in a very good state and they're unsettled, with unsettled players or maybe an unhappy manager or difficult owners, then you might want to consider a big fall in place or even relegation. So that might give you some idea how to tackle this issue with Black Swan events. So let's have a look at the distribution of changes in place and just compare this Championship League to the EPL from 96-97 to 22-23. So there's our Championship League, and we have basically what we're saying here is that of all the changes in place, 4.7% of these changes were a no change. They didn't change. And then we have this long, broad, flat distribution, and this actually suggests a more competitive league, with incumbent clubs changing league places by a bigger amount. To put it another way, again, a flatter distribution makes it harder to predict changes in league place. We could compare that to the Championship League, and 10% of the clubs don't change. 10% of the times there's no change in place, which compares to 4% of the time. So again, there's a significant difference here. And there's your Black Swan events. And there's a table up there which basically all that is saying is that between positions -3, down by 3 places, up to 3 places, that accounts for only 44% of all the changes, whereas in the EPL, most of the changes, 64%, occur in that range. So again, the EPL, the changes aren't as big. In the CL, the Championship League, changes are big. So let's have a look at some predictions from 2022-23, and I selected 10 at random, 10 sets of predictions, so there they are, and 5 were from various websites like Sky Bet, Supercomputer, WST stands for World Soccer Talk 424, and then we've got our 5 YouTubers, the Irish guy, Thogden, James Lawrence Alcott, Nick from Sheffield United Way, and Hal from Sheffield United Way. We can then have a look and assess whether or not these predictions are in line with or attuned to the historical data. And that's what we'll do now. And we'll look at this how they stack up. So let's take a look. And here's our comparison. I'm taking the last 10 years from 2013 to 2023. And we've got here, for instance, the incumbents shared 64% of the relegations. The clubs relegated from the EPL only shared 6% of all the relegations, and the clubs promoted from the League One accounted for 30% of all the relegations. And so again, 70% of the first and second places were taken by incumbents, 30% were taken by the EPL clubs. Again, a lower percentage than people might have thought. And the incumbents, again, had the greatest share of all places from third and sixth. Third, sixth, and then first to sixth. It's a sort of broad overall average. So the predictions are listed in a thing called what I'm calling the group score for each club. This is simply the average of all their predictions, and that average is then ranked. And so as a group, this lot, a disparate group, they weren't also communicating. Norwich and Sheffield were seen as the two teams that were going to get automatic promotion, and Reading, Birmingham and Rotherham were most likely to be relegated down here at the bottom. And to make comparisons then, we need the league places from 21 and 22 to identify, and we need to identify the EPL clubs, those promoted from EFL 22, 23, yeah, that's right. So here we are. And that basically what we've got here is, interestingly already, is the, based on the group score, the 3 EPL clubs are in the top 6 at first, third and fourth, and one of the EFL clubs is being relegated. So that's an interesting point to make. So let's think about how the predictions are for the EPL clubs. Did they get in the first and second? Were they third to sixth? How many of the EPL clubs are in the top 6 in terms of these predictions? And so what we've got here, I've coloured the squares. So all but 4 predictions have the EPL clubs taking up the top 6 places. So what we're saying here is that they are, again, people are over predicting or maybe thinking that the EPL clubs are going to do much better than they actually do in reality. So if you like, in the last 10 years, only 6 clubs, only 6 EPL teams achieved first and second. These predictions here are saying that, you know, it'll be 60%. That 12 of the predictions, 12 of these predictions have the incumbents, rather the EPL clubs, going up or staying in first and second. In terms of relegation, the EFL, in terms of relegations, the EFL clubs, again, this isn't too bad. It's roughly in line with historical averages. The only thing, and it's not shown here, is the average place that they put these EFL clubs in was 17th, when the historical average is 13th. So we'll then look at no change in place, and we're highlighting those. So you can see, for instance, number 3, this Cardiff from World Soccer Talk, had Millwall staying in 9th, so their total there was 1. I'm going to get my pointer going here. And overall, the numbers seems reasonable. 6% of the predictions have a stay in, a no change in place, which compared to 5% is actually not bad. But again, look at Supercomputer, number 5. They have had more than 3 clubs staying in the same place. Thogden, who Irish guy, number 6, had 2, and then Thogden, who was number 7 up here, had 2. So again, the some of the predictions are perhaps seeing more clubs staying in their league place than actual fact is the historical norm. So we can look at the change in place for the predictions. So here's the last data for the last 10 years. The average is for no change in place is 4.7% of the predictions, of the actual changes in place were 4% of changes in place were no change in place. And we can then see that this is the broad distribution. And again, if we then overlay here our predictions, we can see that they're not necessarily aligned with the historical data. If we do the drop-down lines, we can see that basically predictions overestimate no change and small change in place, and they kind of underestimate the bigger changes. Clearly, these are only 10 predictors, so this sample is too small to draw any reliable conclusions for all. Championship League predictors. But again, it's an interesting kind of thing that we're a bit cautious when it comes to our predictions. And it's actually interesting here to look at the differences of opinion. And this table is just a count of all the predictions for each club. So Norwich, who in the group place was put first, there were 2 predictions that it would be first. There were 4 predictions that it would be second. There would be 1 prediction that it would be third, 1 prediction that it would be fourth, 1 prediction that it would be fifth, and 1 prediction that it would be seventh. So if you count along, you can get an idea about basically the spread of the predictions. The green cells going down here, the diagonals, they show when a prediction matches with the group place, where, if you like, there's agreement. So A is, then we've got column A here, that's the number of different predictions. So we've got 6 different predictions for Norwich, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then we've got sort of, B, this bottom row, is the number of different predictions per league place. So again, for first, we had 6 teams. There are 6 teams, Norwich, Sheffield, Watford, Burnley, Middlesbrough and Huddersfield reaching first. So again, this gives you an idea of the spread. And this pattern is quite typical, and it's certainly typical for the EPL, where it's quite close up at the top of the table, starts to spread out, gets fatter, and starts to narrow a little bit as we get to the lower league standings. So let's have a look at QPR. Well, we are all agreeing to differ here. There's 9 predictions, different predictions for QPR. So a whole range of predictions, and only one where there's 2 that agree. So, you know, QPR is obviously causing a bit of a problem, or caused a bit of a problem. And if we look at it from the top to the bottom, we can see that there's up to 9 different clubs being predicted for 6th place. And we've got on 19th place, we've got again 9 clubs. So that's just a way to show how these predictions can pan out. Now I'm going to look at some advice, and this is only in the context of the data, the historical data. This is just to align your predictions maybe with the data, and it's probably best to go from historically where there's less uncertainty to more uncertainty. So my suggestion is that you start with the promoted clubs, got clear unequivocal data on this, and it looks like these clubs do much better than people think. So on average, 2 out of the 3 clubs stay up, and the average place achieved is 15th. Then you want to look at the EPL relegated clubs, and here, you know, remember that only about half of these clubs relegated from the EPL end up in the top 6 places in their first year back. And the average place of the EPL clubs not achieving first or second is 9th. So again, you might want to bear that. Now you have to think about these dreaded black swans. And again, from the previous slide, you want to think about breaking it into 2. Are they going to go up or are they going to go down? So the clubs at the bottom of the table, are they in really good shape? Do they have the right manager, good players, working well as a team, supportive owners and all that? In which case, then you might want to consider a big change in place to the top of the table. Those that are at the top of the table from last year, again, if they look like they're maybe in a poor state, unsettled players, something happened over the summer making the manager unhappy, difficult owners or change in ownership, then you might want to consider relegating, dropping these clubs from their previous position down, even possible relegation. Now you have to decide first and second. If you haven't picked a relegated EPL team for first or second, which has occurred on 6 occasions in the last 10 years, or identified a potential Black Swan club for these places, which has occurred on 2 occasions, then you're left with the remaining incumbents. Of the 12 occasions an incumbent non-Black Swan club claimed first and second, 7 came from 3rd to 6th places, 3rd to 6th places, and 5 came from 10th to 13th places. So for the 23-24 season, that's my cat by the way, the teams to consider here for the top 6 places are Middlesbrough, Coventry and Sutherland, and from 10th to 13th, Swansea, Watford, Preston and Norwich. The cat wants feeding. Now, in terms of relegation, if you haven't selected or promoted a team or a Black Swan team for relegation, you are left with the incumbent clubs. So there's not much to go on here, frankly. It's really about your knowledge. But curiously, those clubs that are in 6th to 11th place and curiously 17th have not seen a relegation in the last 10 years. It's clubs in the 21st place who have had the most relegations. Now you have to decide all the rest, which of course is, it means you've probably got about 14 predictions to make. The only advice here is I have is only to have one club at the very most to remain in last season's place. The rest should all change by on average 5 places, or at least 3 places, with 1 or 2 bigger changes, e.g. 7 places. So if you like, as a summary, any prediction relegating all 3 League One promoted clubs is a bit rash. Predictions placing 2 of the EPL clubs in 1st and 2nd could again be seen as a little rash, and any prediction of 3 or 4 clubs retaining their league place is again perhaps a little rash. So again, we can look at some advice here, and this I quite like doing. I did this for the other one, and here's the place changes for all the incumbent clubs. I'll get my pointer working here, over the last 10 years. So these are clubs in position 3 down to 21, and obviously the green places here are where the club in that particular place got promoted to the EPL through the playoff. And what we do here is we just simply count the number of places these clubs have gone to. So here's another Wizzo table. So the club in 3rd place, well, they went to 1st on 1 occasion, they went to 2nd on 1 occasion, they stayed in 3rd on 1 occasion, and then once they went to 8th, once they went to 13th, and then there were 2 Black Swan events, 1 to 18th from 3rd place down to 20th, and avoiding relegation, luckily. And so reading from the row from left to right tells you where the clubs went to, and reading from the columns tells you where the clubs came from. And here's the thing, if you put in the clubs from last year, their place last year, so Middlesbrough was 4th, Coventry was 5th, West Brom was 9th, you can have an idea about what historically has happened to these clubs in that position. So for instance, Swansea is in 10th, and historically Swansea seems to have, the clubs in 10th place seem to do quite well in the following season. So 1 year they stayed in that place, but if you look at all these points here, that suggests a rise in place. So one time the club in 10th place went to 1st, one time they went to 2nd, one time they went to 3rd, one time they went to 6th, 7th, and 2 times they went to 9th. It's only on 2 occasions in the last 10 years that a club in 10th went to 19th or 20th. So what you might want to think here is, will history repeat itself? And obviously, with a pinch of salt, but think about the club's current state, its current standing. Is it in a good place or is it in a poor place? And along the bottom, just to remind you, you've got where the clubs from the EPL, what positions they achieved. So we had 5 clubs from the EPL get automatic promotion to 1st, and we had only 1 club get automatic promotion going to 2nd. So that's our 6 clubs there. And here's the League One teams, and you can see that some of these clubs have give a respectable performance. 1 League One club actually reached 5th place, 1 club reached 8th place, and then that's the number that were actually relegated. So looking at a consistent way, then we can compare your predictions, because this is really sort of setting up the scene for inviting you to do your own predictions. So what we start here with, it's very actually quite straightforward. Well, basically, I'll go straight to it. Here's your predictions, for instance, for Man City for the EPL. I should have changed that to Championship League teams. Thinking about it. But you might predict that Man City went, your prediction was they'd be third, they went first. So that's a difference of 2. That's a difference of 2 places. 2 times 2 is 4. So that's what we're talking about, is the difference squared. So Liverpool, you had them at 1, they were at second, so that's a difference of -1. And so 1 times 1 is 1. And so we can compare that to Jay's predictions. They predicted Man City would be 4th. They were actually fact first, as we saw. So the difference of 3, so 3 times 3 is 9. And we add those up and we get this score. So your score could be 14, Jay's score was 20. Yours is lower than Jay's, your predictions are better. And you can kind of confirm that by taking the score per club, which is basically an average. This is by the average by how much you are out. So technically, you don't have to concern yourself too much with this. It's the square root of that score divided by the number of predictions. So if you were doing that for the Championship League, it would be divided by 24. Why is this a better measure? Well, first off, it's more precise. And if you were to add up these differences, you'd only end up with 0. If you take the absolute value, actually ignore the signs, you can have many with the same amount. You could try and award you could award perhaps 3 points for an exact prediction, 2 points for 1 place, 1 point for predictions out by 2 places, and so on. But one thing wrong with that is that often leads to predictions with the same value, the same kind of score, and basically it overlooks the predictions that are not that just aren't included. So you will use the 5 YouTuber predictions to show how it works. Okay, so here we've got the Irish guy Thogden, James Lawrence Alcott, Nick from Sheffield United Way, and Stuart Hal rather from Sheffield United Way. And recall, there's our Huddersfield. That was our Black-Swan event from last year. They went from 3rd down to 18th, and this is the position all these clubs had. So we can now start to work out what their scores were. So the difference is, again, the prediction minus the 22-23 place. So we had, for instance, the Irish guy predicted Middlesbrough would be 5th, they were 4th, that's a difference of 1. They predicted Coventry, which were 5th, they predicted they'd drop down to 17th, so that's a difference of 12. And then we've got, shall we say, Hull. The Irish guy predicted they'd be 19th, they got to 15th, so that's a difference of 4, and so on. Now we can do the difference squared. So let's look at Luton. The Irish guy had Luton at 16th. They actually bounced in at 3rd, a bit of a surprise there. So that's a difference of 13. 13 times 13 is 169. So, and again, Coventry, the Irish guy had Coventry at 17th. They came in at 5th, that's a difference of 12. That's a 12 times 12 is 144. Down at the other end here, for Sunderland, they had Sunderland at 19th, whereas in fact they got 6th. So they bounced up. He was out by 13 places, so 13 times 13 is 169. And we can add these all up. Oh, by the way, what we've got here is, this is just, I forgot about that. Here's the group places based on these 5 predictions. And what these little ticks and crosses here show is where the group got the clubs mostly right and where they got them mostly wrong. So with Sunderland, they were, as a promoted club, they were 6th. We had predictions of 14th, we had predictions of 12, 16, 10, 19, and 19. So, you know, the promoted club was underestimated, and the same applied to Norwich. They reached 13th. The Irish guy thought they'd do much better at 3rd. Indeed, Thogden thought they would win the league, and then James Lawrence Alcott thought they'd be 7th. Again, Nick from Sheffield United way thought it'd be 2nd, and Howell thought it'd be 1st. So bit of an overestimation there on Norwich. And then for QPR, again, they went from 11th to 20th, and a bit of a mixed bag here, 7th, 11th, 6th, 19th, 14th. So who was the winner out of this lot? Well, we can then add them all up. We add it all up, and we can get the score per club. We can count how many were exact, and then we can do the rank. So as it happens, Nick from Sheffield United way was ranked 1st on the lowest score, 526. They were only out by about 4.5 places per club, compared to, say, Howell from who was ranked 4th at 6 places out on average, and who was 2nd? Thogden was 2nd on 5.6. So hopefully you'll appreciate that the different squared approach to comparing predictions is okay. So what I've got here is all 10 of those predictions that I collected. So there's a change in the group place here because it's based on these averages. So this has changed slightly. But we can re-rank those again in top order. So again, we've got Stu, Nick at Sheffield United away, top, 424 2nd, Thogden 3rd, and so forth and onwards down to the bottom. Sky Bet coming in at 9th with a score of 1,122, out by an average of 6.84 places. I've been following the supercomputer and Sky Bet, and I would treat their predictions with a pinch of salt, he said. Okay, right, we can then look at predicting the championship, which is what we're doing. I'm inviting you all to have a go. It's open to everybody, not just content providers. Send me your predictions to predicttheprem23@gmail.com, and if you could do it in this order, please, that would be really helpful. Your email address, your playing name or alias, you know, Dr. Bonkers, the name of any football club you support, and the first 2 letters of a UK postcode or town and country if you're non-UK, and your predictions in this alphabetical order. If I can, I'll see if I can post these names, these clubs' names in the comments that you can then copy and paste and play around with. In the meantime, you might want to do a screen grab and grab all this, because here you've got some information to remind you about EPL clubs, what they've performed as, the promoted clubs, and the number of Black-Swan events at -13, +13, and again the no changes along the bottom there. Why do I want your email address? Well, it lets me send updates if I don't do it via YouTube. And also, why do I want your club and your address, or your postcode rather? It's really just to do some analysis, just for a bit of fun, based on the location and fan base. None of this information will be used in any other way. When do I want the dates? When do I want your submissions? Well, by the 11th of August, if possible. And that's a week after the start of the Champions League. That's on the 4th of August. And before you send your predictions, just add them all up. Your 1s, your 2s, your 5s, your 6s, your 24th, your 22nd. Add them all up, and your total should be 300. If you haven't got a total of 300, you've got some duplication somewhere, which often happens. So that's just a way to check it, and you can then make sure you've got it. Okay, so what's the plan? Well, I can't offer a prize for a winner, but I will try and send out or post on YouTube regular updates on how the predictions are playing out, which actually is quite interesting. Much depends on how many people enter the competition and how quickly I can get it all into a spreadsheet. So as I worried, I could be biting off more than I could chew, but we're going to give it a go, and I'll keep you all informed about how we do. In the meantime, thank you very much, and I do mean that, for your time to go through all this, and I hope to hear from you soon. Thank you very much.